For days, I found myself going back over the same fragments of information, trying to understand how an 84-year-old grandmother could vanish from her Tucson home without a clear trace. Nancy Guthrie had always seemed like the steady center of her family's universe, especially as the mother of television journalist Savannah Guthrie. When news broke that she had disappeared after a quiet evening at home, the public response was immediate and emotional. Neighbors described her as warm, faithful, and resilient. There were no obvious signs of robbery, no dramatic disturbance, just small, unsettling details that left more questions than answers. At first, many assumed it was a random crime. But as the days unfolded, something far more personal began to surface, something that would gently unravel the image everyone thought they understood about Nancy and the private world she had quietly carried for decades, a life built on strength and sacrifice. Nancy's story, at least the one her family knew, was rooted in strength. After her husband passed away in 1989, she raised 3 children in Tucson, Arizona, becoming both anchor and shelter for her grieving household. Friends recall her modest ranch-style home as a place of stability and comfort. She worked diligently, volunteered at church, and made sure her children felt supported through every stage of their lives. Savannah often spoke publicly about her mother's resilience, crediting her calm determination for shaping her own career. To the outside world, Nancy embodied grace under pressure. She never seemed bitter or defeated by widowhood. Instead, she leaned into faith, family, and responsibility. But strength, as it turns out, can sometimes mask longing. Behind the dependable routines and Sunday dinners, there were quieter layers to Nancy's identity that even those closest to her never fully saw. The envelope that changed everything 5 days after Nancy disappeared. An unmarked envelope arrived at Savannah's New York apartment. Inside was a faded photograph dated 1992. It showed a much younger Nancy standing beside a man no one in the family recognized. They were outside a small cafe in Santa Fe, New Mexico, smiling in a way that felt intimate but natural. On the back of the photograph were simple handwritten words: "She deserved more than secrets. Ask about Elena." That single line shifted the entire narrative. During a tense video call, Savannah and her siblings stared at the image, searching for recognition. None came. The date alone raised questions. It was 3 years after their father's death. Who was this man, and who was Elena? What seemed at first like a cruel prank slowly revealed itself as a doorway into a chapter of Nancy's life no one had known existed. A chance encounter in Santa Fe. In the early 1990s, still navigating grief, Nancy had attended a church retreat in Santa Fe. It was there she met Victor Ramirez, an artist and gallery owner who had also experienced loss. Their connection, according to those who later learned the story, began simply with shared conversations about rebuilding life after heartbreak. Victor lived a creative, expressive existence that contrasted sharply with Nancy's structured routine back home. He painted bold southwestern landscapes and hosted gatherings filled with music and discussion. For Nancy, those brief weekends offered something unfamiliar: space to breathe as an individual, not only as a mother or widow. What started as friendship gradually deepened into a relationship for all to remain separate from her Tucson life. It was not reckless or dramatic. It was careful, compartmentalized, and deeply human. A quiet companionship formed in midlife between two people who understood loneliness, becoming Elena. Over time, Nancy adopted a name Victor used affectionately: Elena. The name symbolized a freer version of herself, one less defined by duty and more by curiosity. Under this identity, she helped manage aspects of Victor's gallery, even exploring her own interest in painting. In Santa Fe, she dressed more casually, laughed more loudly, and allowed herself to engage in conversations about art and philosophy. It was not about abandoning her family. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she felt had been set aside. She never intended harm, yet the secrecy created distance she could not openly explain. Letters were exchanged the old-fashioned way, carefully stored and hidden. Nancy believed she was protecting her children from confusion or pain. In her mind, she was preserving their memory of a devoted widow, while quietly nurturing a companionship that helped her feel alive again. The weight of two worlds. Balancing two identities is not simple, even when motivations are gentle. Nancy continued attending church in Tucson, celebrating birthdays and offering steady guidance to her growing family. Meanwhile, occasional trips to Santa Fe became personal retreats as her children built careers and families of their own. She allowed herself slightly longer visits. Still, she never spoke of Victor. The longer the secret lived, the heavier it became. Aging brought health challenges that made travel harder. Anxiety occasionally crept in. Victor reportedly encouraged honesty, suggesting her children might be more understanding than she feared. But Nancy hesitated. She worried about disrupting the image they carried of their late father and of her role in preserving that memory. What began as a private comfort slowly evolved into an emotional tightrope, where love for her family and loyalty to her companion quietly pulled at each other. The family's emotional reckoning. When investigators confirmed Victor's existence and the decades-long relationship, the Guthrie siblings faced a wave of mixed emotions: shock, sadness, confusion, and even empathy. It was not simply the revelation of a relationship that unsettled them, it was realizing how much of their mother's inner life had remained unseen. Savannah, known publicly for her composure, reportedly struggled privately with the discovery. Annie and Cam asked questions many adult children might ask in similar moments. Why didn't she trust us? Were we not safe enough for her truth? Yet beneath the hurt was understanding. Their mother had spent her life protecting them. Perhaps in her own way, she believed she was still doing that. The discovery did not erase her devotion. Instead, it complicated it, revealing a woman who had loved deeply in more than one direction without knowing how to merge those worlds. Investigating the unknown, authorities expanded their investigation to include Nancy's connections in Santa Fe, exploring whether anyone beyond close companions had known about her alternate identity. There was no indication of financial exploitation or conflict within the gallery community. Victor cooperated fully, offering letters and personal items to help establish timelines. Nancy's final visit to Santa Fe earlier in January appeared peaceful. However, she had mentioned feeling unsettled in the weeks before her disappearance, anxiety that may or may not have been connected to real events. Investigators carefully reviewed phone records and neighborhood footage in Tucson, searching for any sign that someone had been watching her. At this stage, officials emphasized that there was no confirmed link between her private relationship and her disappearance. What remained clear was that Nancy's life, though layered, had been built on sincere affection rather than deception for gain, public reaction, and compassion. As details emerged, public reaction ranged from surprise to support. Many people expressed empathy, recognizing how loneliness after loss can shape unexpected choices. Others reflected on how often older adults are perceived only through their roles as parents or grandparents, rather than as individuals with evolving needs. The story sparked conversations about identity, autonomy, and the quiet ways people reinvent themselves later in life. While speculation circulated online, the Guthrie family asked for privacy and compassion. The focus, they said, remained on bringing Nancy home safely. In many ways, the narrative shifted from scandal to humanity. Nancy was not a villain in a dramatic tale. She was a woman who carried both devotion and desire for companionship, trying imperfectly to balance them. The public gradually began to see her not as a contradiction, but as complex and deeply human. A story still unfolding, yet Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains unresolved, but the portrait of her life is now fuller than before. She was a widow who rebuilt her family's stability. She was a mother who shaped a daughter admired nationwide. She was also Elena, a creative, reflective woman who allowed herself love again in quiet corners of another city. Those truths do not cancel each other out. They coexist. As her family continues to hope for answers, they also grapple with understanding a mother they thought they knew completely. Perhaps the most poignant lesson in Nancy's story is this: people contain multitudes even when they appear simple on the surface. In seeking answers about her disappearance, her loved ones have also uncovered something tender, a reminder that even the strongest among us sometimes carry hidden chapters written not out of betrayal, but out of longing to feel whole